When the Russian government asked Pavel Durov to use his social media company to censor its political opponents, he refused. He said he would rather resign and leave the country where he was born than participate in something like that. Such was his commitment to free speech. Now, you got to compare that, what he did, what Pavel Durov did, to what Mark Zuckerberg did, or Parag Agarwal, the guy who ran Twitter before Elon Musk bought it. Both of them have collaborated with governments to censor people, and that's shameful.
We get too much attention from the FBI, the security agencies, wherever we came to the US. So to give you an example, last time I was in the US, I brought an engineer that is working for Telegram, and there was an attempt to secretly hire my engineer behind my back by cybersecurity officers or agents, wherever they are called.
The US government tried to hire your engineer?
That's my understanding. That's what he told me.
To write code for them or to break into Telegram?
They were curious to learn which open source libraries are integrated to the Telegram's app, on the client side, and they were trying to persuade him to use certain open source tools that he would then integrate into the Telegram's code that, in my understanding, would serve as backdoors.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. My name is Andy Libson, and I'm joined by Kenny Zepeda. We are online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. And as you can see, Eduardo's not here today. Alex is not here today. And actually, people behind the scene, you might not know this, but we often record on Thursday. We're recording on Friday because I had back to school night on Thursday, and Kenny was the only person who could make a recording on Friday. So it's just you and me, Kenny.
All right, let's do it.
So today we're going to talk about, I think we're going to be talking about the internet and freedom and whether we actually, dictatorship and autocracy, because I want to talk about, or rather, Kenny, you had raised the idea of talking about what's going on with the economy, and I do think that episode is an important one to do. But on Saturday, August 24th, was it a Saturday?
I don't remember the exact date, but
I think it was August 24th, and I think that's a Saturday. Pavel Durov was arrested in France, and Pavel Durov is the leader or the co-owner of Telegram, was arrested in France for a series of charges that we'll get into, but largely because he is operating a social network system that is not controlled by the French government or by the Western government, as by and large. I don't want to overstate that, but at least by the establishment. And so they arrested him. He was, my understanding, he was surprised to be arrested. And there's even a rumor that he was going to meet Macron for dinner, and then they picked him up. They nicked him instead. What else can I say about this? We can go more deeply into the charges right now, because should I do that right now?
We can also talk about what Telegram is, right?
Go ahead and say what you want about Telegram.
Yeah, so Telegram is a messaging system, and also more like a social media type of thing. So it's kind of like a WhatsApp.
Yeah.
But there are threads, there are channels. So I know that in one of the biggest things that makes Telegram different, right, the WhatsApp and other messaging systems and social media systems is that they put a strong emphasis on privacy, right? So encryption, and for that same reason, a lot of people use it, especially in areas of conflict. I I think I used it in 2020 when the whole George Floyd was happening.
Yeah.
Because that was what people said uh, we would get from Telegram, so anonymity to a degree, even though I was skeptical regardless.
Yeah.
But again, that it's being used in multiple areas of conflicts, and this is one of the major ways that a lot of people that I listen to, that are commentators, about like the war in Ukraine, what's happening in Gaza, for example, they use this medium to be able to access information that otherwise you wouldn't get, because uh, everything else is heavily censored. We barely get any information through like any other social media platforms.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't know what's happening, right? And I know that, for example, Garland Nixon talks about references Telegram a lot. When he's talking about how the Hamas fighters went and blew up a tank, just like by sneaking up and blowing up an Israeli tank, or what's going on in Ukraine and stuff. And so yeah, so again, and I think one more thing to maybe point out is that this guy Pavel Durov, he had actually gotten into a situation with the Russian government, and he fled Russia because there was a pro-democracy, quote unquote, events happening in Russia some years back, and Telegram one of the major ways that people were communicating with each other and organizing. And so he left Russia, and he was spoken of in the Western media as a freedom fighter, right? Because he's for freedom of speech in that circumstance, right? In the Russian events, but then we are here, right? And he was caught, and maybe now I think you can talk about the charges that are being raised against him.
The things I know about it was called VK. That's what he did in Russia. And at least that's those letters I understood it as existing under. And they had basically said, we want you to the Russian government had said, we want you to give us information on people who are using VK. And Pavel Durov had refused to do that, along with his brother Nikolai Durov, who's also part of it. It is important to say that Pavel Durov is one of the top 120th wealthiest people in the world, like 12 billion, having like $12 billion, worth $12 billion. So this is not like some person on the side. This is part of the capitalist establishment basically being chewed on. I mean, we've seen maybe some similar things we've seen this, with like them doing maybe sometimes giving static to Elon Musk and things like that. The things I would say is that the thing that had made Telegram seemingly different was the fact that a lot of the things that they had done to Facebook and YouTube, and pretty much all other social media things that we know of, other than like TikTok, which is on the other side, I guess. Although they've done it with TikTok as well, because they got TikTok to crack as well. Is they would basically say to these owners, you have to give us information about some of your users, because they might be spreading disinformation, there might be child porn, there might be guns running, there might be illegal activities going on. So you can't just let people go free here. You've got to give us access to it. Now, to what extent were arms really twisted, and to what extent are these people really just working together? I tend to think of them more as in cahoots than really actually, feeling so threatened that they give it all up. But one thing you can say is Pavel Durov has resisted at one level some of those threats. Although he has given them information, like they went after him around ISIS using Telegram, and he did give them some information or some elements of the information they wanted. But he hasn't given them, like Tucker Carlson was interviewing him, and there was a story that one of his engineers had been approached by the FBI to try to create a backdoor into Telegram, so that the FBI could snoop on what was going on within Telegram. That was blocked by Pavel Durov and by the engineer. But that gives you kind of a sense of like he's not playing ball with them as much as others are playing ball, and so they're coming after him.
And just one thing, I guess, at least in the Western media, one of the biggest critique is that there is no, this is a euphemism, right? There is no content moderation, right? And that is a euphemism for censorship, and filtering through, what goes through in those channels. And yes, they put emphasis on the, allowing criminality to take root in this platform.
Right. No, that's what they're claiming. So yeah, maybe just show some of the things that I had found, because I think in looking at the charges, they are actually fairly obvious what they're trying to do, and I think it is worth looking at them. Let's see, share. So this is something I had seen with Glenn Greenwald. He had posted this. This is like from the Ministry of Justice, and basically says that yeah, he was arrested on Saturday, August 24th. It was done by the JUNALCO, which is the Section J3, which is given the power to fight against cybercrime in Paris, out of the Paris Public Prosecutor's Office. And if you look at some of these charges, complicity in webmastering on an online platform, complicity in possessing pornographic images of minors, complicity in distributing and offering or making available pornographic images of minors, complicity in acquiring, transporting, possessing, offering, or selling narcotic substances, complicity in offering or selling, making available without legitimate reason, equipment, tools, programs, or data designed for or adapted to get access to or damage the operations of an automated data processing system, or some complicity in basically somebody who's going to do a cybercrime. So all these complicity charges are not saying that this guy does that. They're just saying that on your platform, these things might be happening, and we're basically going to charge you with a crime because of that. So that's part of what's going on here, which I think people can see that it's absurd. Like people do crimes over the phone, people do crimes, with printed media, and sending notes, sending letters, or so-called crimes, I guess. But you could arrest the post office, you could arrest AT&T or Sprint. I mean, it is clear that they're basically saying you didn't use our normal talking points for giving us what we wanted, so now we're going to say that you are complicit in those crimes of pornography and drug trafficking and things like that. That's the first thing I want to say about this, because I'll look at some of these other charges. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just commentary on, I guess, to add that any social media platform can be arrested from these charges right here. Facebook, TikTok, anything really. Even though they do the quote unquote moderation, they can be found complicit for this.
Yeah. The next one I'm going to go to is this refusal one. Refusal to communicate at the request of competent authorities information or documents necessary for carrying out and operating interceptions allowed by law. Like they're literally saying is you refuse to let us. And what they mean by competent authorities are them, whether it be FBI or Mossad or CIA or whatever Western, M13 or what is the British one? M15.
MI6, no?
MI6. That's right. What it is. M13 is the drug lord from South America, I guess. Gangs. So this is just them basically saying you're refusing to give us the information we want about your system, and so that's a crime. That was interesting to me. I don't know if you want to say anything about that one.
Yeah, just I guess overall it's a very broad net that they're using. It's not very specific, right? Like so it's setting a precedent, right? Like but it's obviously being enforced in a targeted way.
It is a broad net, but it's fairly clear that the state is basically saying we want to clamp down here. You're not helping us clamp down, and so we're going to charge you with the crime of not helping us clamp down. Like this is broad but clear. Like, I mean, the complicity thing, you can read a little bit behind. You have to know the backstory to know what's going on there. But this refusal here is openly naked, saying, look, we told you we want information about your system and about the people who are using your system. You're not giving it to us. So we're calling that a crime. So that to me is like pretty striking. The last ones I want to talk about are these guys down here at the bottom, providing cryptology services aimed to ensure confidentiality without certified declaration, providing a cryptology tool not solely ensuring providing a cryptology tool not solely ensuring authentication or integrity monitoring without prior declaration. And these, like, they're just basically saying you're giving people cryptology services that we're not able to hack into and get control of, and therefore, like, that's a crime, because the things that the certified declaration would clearly mean a possible backdoor for state criminal justice services, and like they're just pretty much saying you can't do cryptology that keeps the state from snooping around inside your service here.
I mean, I don't know if this is the point to bring this question up, but I do wonder, right? Like, so the state has their own tools.
Did I go off sharing?
Sure.
Okay. Go ahead.
So this whole backdoor thing, right? Like, it makes me wonder, right? Like, if they really don't have a way to access, or they're again trying to set a precedent and going after, right, like the head, because I tend to think that the state has a bunch of tools, but they don't always use them because they don't have the legal precedent to do it in public, right? And go after people in that way, right? Like, for example, I think of this whole license thing in California, right? And immigrants, and like, oh, it's not going to be used to persecute illegal immigrants. They can surely find you if they want.
Yeah.
It's a matter of whether they can use whatever information they gather through their snooping around to come in the clear, right, and go after whoever they want to. So that's what I'm wondering. Like, if in reality they don't have access, and I don't know if you've seen anything about that.
I have the same question. The way I look at it is, I ultimately believe that people who are the authors of this, which is the U.S. military industrial complex, who are the authors of the internet, authors of these sorts of things, ultimately, if they had to, could find ways into this stuff. What I think their problem is that they've gotten all the other institutions to work with them to collect all the data and just move it very seamlessly into Idaho or wherever they're storing this stuff and doing that. And I think what you have here is like, it seems like a block in that. Not that there's complete opaqueness there, like you can't see it at all, but I have a feeling that it is an interference in their system for just collecting all the data, getting everything they want, getting everyone cataloged as they want. And so it's like, to me, in the same way that they were collecting metadata off of like Sprint calls and things like that, my guess is they don't want to have to deal with the difficulties of trying to get all the metadata off of Telegram. And they certainly don't want to deal with anybody who thinks that that's the way you should be operating. Like, what they're trying to establish is there is no freedom, there is no privacy, there is no safety on the internet. And they are trying to establish that the notion that we as people who use it should support the state as it states that is trying to keep us safe by eliminating privacy. So at the end of the day, no, I don't think Telegram really is a foolproof by any stretch. But I do think it provides block barriers and speed bumps, and maybe even things that are difficult to be digested by their mass consuming machine. And so they don't have a way of dealing with it. So they're like saying, just get the fuck out of our way and give us all your information and play ball so we can just do what we need to do. But also, like you said, I do think they're trying to shut down a system that has been used to give information to people about Ukraine, about Gaza and what's going on in it, what Israel is doing in Gaza, and also in Africa. Telegram was a major system for supposedly how some of the people who helped ferment those coups in Niger and places like that, places that took down the French colony there, and French forces ultimately. So it's not. I don't think it's an accident that France is where he was arrested.
And I think to add to this whole notion that this Telegram is foolproof, right? Or like that it's like so that it actually protects your privacy. It's like there's also the element like the powers that be are fully aware of the capabilities of Telegram, and they are absolutely engaged in propaganda, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is in those systems, so um, so it's not out of the reach of the powers that be, right? Like, so this is why what you're saying makes sense, that they're trying to, I think, control. I don't know if they're trying to shut it down, but they're definitely trying to have an easier way, and also setting a precedent, right, for anyone else or any other institutions, right? Because if they really wanted to bury this guy Pavel Durov, they can come up with other fucking shit, and really go after him. But they're coming up with these broad things that like are almost ridiculous for anyone really listening to in the censorship sphere, right? That you're aware of how censorship works. It is obvious to me that it's more of an example than actually like burying this guy, because they can take him down again in many different ways, accuse him of other more personal things, because like you said, it's complicity in, right, just by the facilitating the ability of supposed criminal actors, right, to do their actions. But they're not really going after him, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, again, I think this is where maybe we have a little slight difference. Is I think they're being very specific about what they're taking on here. They're saying you cannot operate an encrypted system. You cannot operate something that the state cannot look into. You cannot operate something that the state cannot see who's on your little system in some way, shape, or form. They're very clear with these, with not just the complicity stuff, but the refusal to and the cryptology thing. And so it what they are making the case for in the West is, again, that, and it's so public that I do see in it trying to get all of us to accept that the state will keep us safe by eliminating our privacy. So I agree with you that Pavel Durov is not the target. They certainly will be. I think they're going to be hard on him, and I think things are going to get harder on anybody who tries to do what something like Pavel Durov does. And we saw that Elon Musk got nailed in Brazil recently for some stuff, and I think they're going to make it more difficult for any of these capitalists who think that they're operating on the margins. But ultimately, the target is us, and I think, like you had mentioned, that there's not just Pavel Durov. There's Scott Ritter. There's Richard Medhurst. There's other characters who are just openly being attacked by the state, and the state is it's like sticking its chest out and basically saying to people, both, what are you going to do about it? Because we're taking on high-profile people, and two, you should support us. We're here to keep you safe, like we kept you safe in COVID. And so I think this is part of changing people's minds, like conditioning people to accept the surveillance that has been getting worse and worse, and for people to basically beg for surveillance in a sense, just like we do when we talk about protecting the border. So to me, they're just trying to make us complicit in our own repression and agree to it. So that's, in that regard, I don't think it's about Pavel Durov. It's about us. I don't know what you want to say about that.
yeah, it's about the people who resist, right? Like, because if you don't see an issue with this, if you just don't, think this is a problem at all, then I don't think. I think the message, like you mentioned, the other characters that are being persecuted, it's also a message to people who want to do right. Like it's not just the CEOs;
Yeah.
it's people who want to speak up, and they're also closing in on those corners, right? That we might think are places of freedom, right, or some sort of tools for liberation, right?
Yeah.
Uh, this I think this is what this demonstrates as well, right? Like that they're closing in all the quarters, right? And I guess we'll get into why, right? Maybe.
Yeah. But they are also attempting to shape the minds of the people who aren't resisting. They are attempting to
Yeah,
get them to go, not only you're not resisting, we are going to get you to agree to the fact that support us in taking down people like Pavel Durov.
I get it. No, yeah, absolutely. Like that again, taking advantage of the goodwill of people, right? Because there are people who do see the world in those terms, right? Like criminality is bad, the rule of law is good. By and large, the state, yeah, they do bad things, but by and large, they keep us safe. They keep the world from coming into chaos, and so they're necessary. And even though some of this might take down some like innocent people, like the overall, message is that it does keep us safe. So I agree. Like it is pushing that narrative of the state, keeping us safe, and the state keeping order and control in a world that is increasingly in chaos.
Right. And it's specifically using language that 5 or 6 years ago, people who looked at the internet, and the very people who right now support this, but who 6 or 7 years ago looked at the internet as this place of possible liberation, privacy, state intervention, cryptology, those sorts of things. People would have said, of course you need to have that. They're literally saying we're arresting this guy for encrypting his stuff. We're putting him in fucking jail. He's not going to be able to leave France. So they are working people's brains over right now, like and getting people to accept something that they might have thought 7 or 8 years ago would have been unacceptable. And so I think I find these charges really interesting by how clear they are. They're not even that broad, in my opinion. They're very clear about we're taking this guy down for believing that people should have the right to their own information that the state cannot get access to. And anyone who supports it becomes another, again, it's another nail in the coffin for the state welding itself, for the working class welding itself to the future of the state and making revolution an impossibility.
I have a question. So again, going back to the globalist, worldview, right? So here we have this guy, right, who had issues with Russia. The Russians right now are claiming to like be on his side in a way, right? Like they're using this as kind of demonstrating the West like inconsistency in morality or whatever, the West like censorship, but they had their own spat, right? And so then he comes to the West. He's also being now persecuted on this side. And so, how do you explain this to someone, who might have the lenses of this is the globalists doing this? Like, what is the difference between the Russians and the West?
I mean, in my opinion, I don't try to explain them differently, because what I see is what is being revealed is that capitalism is a dictatorship, and we are seeing a dictatorship as it's expressed in Russia, because the crackdown was no less brutal in Russia than it is here, and we are seeing the hands of the true hands of the state here in the West, where people thought they had some sort of some sort of democracy or something like that. We are living in a global dictatorship, but all run by bourgeoisie, which is in competition with one another. Now, people can call that globalist, but I see competition. But to me, what is revealed is that the true nature of the world we live in is a dictatorship. And this is something that me and Eduardo talked about in our first few episodes of What's Left when we talked about how Marx talked about capitalism. It's like capitalism is the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. So this is what we get. This is what you're watching. You're watching it unfold. You are getting to see the true face of what your world is. This is not a bug. This is not something that's like, oh my God, they're going off the rails. You are seeing what is truly at the heart of your system, whether it's in Russia, or whether it's in the United States, or whether it's in France, is a dictatorship that will there's no right that they won't eliminate in order to keep themselves in power. So we live in tyranny. Is it a globalist tyranny? I don't think so, but that's my answer to that. And does that make sense?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely.
And one other thing I guess I want to say about and this is more about the internet, because Glenn Greenwald, who was helpful, and I listened to one of his things about Pavel Durov, and there's things I disagree with about him, but that is Glenn Greenwald. One of the things he said was like that what's happening with Pavel Durov is the greatest threat to civil liberties in our lifetime, potentially, because he sees the internet as this place of really where people can truly express themselves, really where people can be free to express themselves. And that's not true. Like, I've been thinking about this, and I was telling Brandy, like, this is something I think I want to bring up on this episode, is like, I think there might be a reason that they call it a net, because we might have thought it was called a net because it was an interlaced network of us. But I think the reason it's called a net is because there was at one point when you were catching fish, your net at one point is free. You don't see yourself in any way as being imposed upon by the net that is being woven underneath you or is being laid underneath you. But the real reason for a net is to catch the fish and trap them and eat them. And so I believe that really is the net we are living in. We are living in a net that was opened during a period in which to grab as many people and get as many of the fish caught within it at a point. And now we are seeing the different phase of the net where the person who runs it is now grabbing the end and tying the ends together and lifting it out of the water now and seeing as much as it can catch. And that's what we live in. That to me, when we come back to the fact that the net is a product of DARPA, it was never a product of liberation. That was just us as foolish fish thinking that this thing was there to help us find each other and swim more freely and things like that. No, the net has only one purpose, which is to ensnare us and to kill us and to make us food for our captors. And so what we're seeing here with Pavel Durov is just the actual real, this is where the net had to go, because it was always about surveillance. Surveillance is not some sort of diversion from what the net was supposed to be. This is what it was intended for. And so the state is just acting as it should to make the fact that a product that it established to control us actually works to control us. And that I feel like we should not look at this as like an attack on civil liberties because the net is like something that could be. No, it was never designed for that. I personally don't think it could ever be that, which is why I think it all has to go. So I just want to say that.
I think that's a very good metaphor, analogy. And I guess when it comes to Pavel Durov, he's no Edward Snowden. He is part of the people who built the net. He's a fucking billionaire that's made money out of data, right? Like, in his product is not right, like freedom or secrecy. I don't think his product, like using your metaphor, is getting a portion of the net, that is connected. And I think what's happening, this is how I see it. It's a dynamic playing out in public that very often happens in private, but a lot of people give in to it a lot quicker. Recently, Mark Zuckerberg, he just had a change of heart, right? Like he started talking about how, there were things done during the pandemic because of pressure of the government, and that he wouldn't do it, the same way again. They will resist more, essentially. But again, like, and this is also where I bring up this notion that money is not power by itself, because you can be rich all you want, but if the state, the coercive apparatus, right, wants to come after your ass, they've done it in Russia plenty, right? Like they're going after billionaires that don't play ball, and so here is the Western powers going after someone who doesn't want to play ball the way they want to, right? In their centralizing net, right? Like, and so again, I want to make it clear that Pavel, like, I don't feel the same way about either Snowden or what was the other guy, the WikiLeaks,
Julian Assange.
Julian Assange. No, this is not the same
Yeah.
situation at all. Again, he's a net builder because just to emphasize what you said, we can't. We've discussed in the past that we really have to reanalyze this whole idea of taking the master's tools and using them for our own, right, on our own liberation, our own, because it's just not the way it's done. And it's scary how wide, how big, how complicated this shit is. For us to try to take it over and use it for our own good, right? Because like we said, yes, Telegram can claim all this shit that there's protect privacy, but again, Pavel Durov is not in the. I don't buy it that his business was secrecy and confidentiality. How do you say it?
Confidentiality.
Confidentiality. Yes, that's not his business. He and the people who are in tech are in the business of data collecting and data selling and data whatever. But they have to bring people in their own portion of the net to make money and to have some sort of leverage and power.
Right. He sold people the promise of privacy to become the 120th richest person in the world. Now, is there an element of truth to the privacy, but that privacy is a lie. Once the idea that there's any privacy on the net is a lie. Just like the idea that I would say cryptocurrency can be something liberatory is a lie.
Blockchain, right? You're talking
now,
about.
But I do think, and I think you agree with this because you're the person who brought it up before we talked about this episode. The fact that you are now seeing high-profile people caught in this by the state, and they're taking them down. And we can even say Trump, one level, and like take him off of Twitter, and Pavel Durov, and then you have people like you had mentioned, Scott Ritter, being not just not allowed on the plane, but his house raided. They know he's going to go ahead and talk about that online. They know he has an audience. Richard Medhurst recently. Do you know about the case of Richard Medhurst?
I do not.
Richard Medhurst, do you know he's the guy who talks about the Palestine? He was arrested at the Heathrow airport like 9 days ago and held in solitary confinement for 24 hours, charged with terrorism. And then they let him go. Not let him go. Like, okay, you're released. But he at this point does not know the status of the charges. That's why he can't fully talk about it. So there is something taking place here that is not unlike, like when we look at the difficulties of the United States that it's having in Ukraine, when we look at the difficulties of Israel, a proxy of the United States having in the Middle East, those difficulties mean that they have to crack down. And so what's happening is connected to the dangers that we see elsewhere in the world, that we see in war and things like that. And so the state is getting more, is conditioning us to, it's getting more aggressive, and it's conditioning us to its aggression. So this is dangerous. And even though they released Julian Assange, the fact that they're willing to say, nah, you're the 120th richest person in the world. We'll take you down anyway. That is pretty significant.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought Trump up because I put him in the same category as this guy. Uh, uh, and I guess people can disagree, but again, high profile, part of the system, but but they use these kind of ridiculous, almost ridiculous ways of going after them, but setting a precedent, for anyone else who wants to, play outside the current.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where the analogy comes. They're pulled the net of people who are trying to swim away, from the center of it all. And again, like I don't care about Trump, but it is telling, right? Like it is revealing that they're willing to do this in public, and because like again, a lot of these dynamics, they happen all the time. This coercion happens in the
Yeah.
center of power, and so yeah, I do think it speaks to the time. I think it speaks to this world that is heading to war. It's already in war, but
Yeah.
it's escalating and intensifying, where the state has to bring its more brutality to the front, right? And I think it's just the beginning of,
Oh, yeah.
of many things.
Well, and we saw, I mean, you and I, we have a difference of opinion with Alex in terms of what the state did 4 years ago, right? Like it wasn't just some sort of like, that was very meaningful what the state got away with. So that was an escalation in the same way that the Patriot Act after 9/11 was an escalation. And I think we're seeing another acceleration of the process of the state revealing its true self to us. And that is not going to be pretty, for many of us, it'd be nicer for the state to kind of hide itself in behind pretty words. But we do live in a dictatorship. People have to understand that we live in a world of tyranny, and in my opinion, the undergirdings of that tyranny is the fact that we live in a system based on the production of profit, which is underpinning that is the theft of every person's work every day in the form of surplus value extracted from the week that people often call profit. So that's the system we live in, which is the theft of workers' labor internationally. And so in order to do that, you need a dictatorship to make that happen.
Because something else that I wanted to bring up is that, again, this is where I, again, see the world differently than someone like Scott Ritter, right? Or Judge Napolitano. I don't know if you listen to him too.
Yeah.
So
he has a lot of good people he interviews.
Yes, they and they come from a more patriotic, constitutionalist, legality, aspect, and I bring them up just to say that when the state wants to come after you, when they truly want to bury you, that shit doesn't matter. The law, the law is not gonna protect you. They can twist it and bend it, or they can just take you out if they want to. And so my point about that is that these institutions that we have to fight, and they're not going to save us. Like pretending that you can swim against again the current when the fucking net is strong and is big and and it's brutal. Yeah, because we're talking about digitally, right? But there's also other elements of the net, right? That's where I want people to think about that the system itself is not gonna protect you because it was built to ensure its success, right? The success of the system, and be brutal when it has to. Because again, there's people who believe in this so-called American project, that it represents a lot of amazing things in rhetoric, right? And it sounds beautiful, but in practice, when you look at history, it's not the freedom that people claim to be defending. because again, this acceleration of the squeeze, again, because again, this is also where I differ from someone like Kim Iverson, right, who is more of a libertarian and talks about corruption, right, and like bad people. And this is why people will probably follow some or consider someone like RFK, right, that they can fix the system. But that's where I differentiate myself from them. That the system itself, all these institutions are part of that net, and you're gonna choke yourself trying to fight it that way, and by yourself, really, like you're one lone fish against a massive net if you're just on your own.
Yeah, and this is where I think in about 2 weeks, we'll we're going to have Michael Caine on again, and he's going to talk to us about RFK Jr. and revisit his discussion about why whatever RFK Jr. is doing is important. And like you said, there are many nets, and one of the nets that is also used to entrap us is the election system, our electoral system, and so many people are caught in that. It's a different kind of net, I would say, but that one is as dangerous as this digital one, and it's been in operation longer, that's for sure. The illusion of democracy and the illusion of choice, where in which we essentially we elect our dictators, and the idea that Trump or RFK Jr. or Jill Stein or anybody who you write your name in, if they were to get elected, there's nothing there other than compliance, and you're just handing over the keys to somebody who's looking to run you over.
Yeah, I love your metaphor. I think it's very it's
Yeah, I've just been thinking about this thing, the net. I mean, obviously, I made it in terms of like
the internet.
but it has a new meaning for me now.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and I guess again, you already brought it up, crypto and all this stuff that people think will be a safety net when if
Yeah,
shit is crashing down, and they roll out these technocratic systems, just again, we've talked about revolution, right? And it's not gonna happen on the internet. It won't
no,
be televised. It would, and it would still be something to navigate, right? Like these mediums, but we're kidding ourselves if we think that we can fight against this beast, in its own terms.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure. Is there anything else we should be saying about what's going on here?
I mean, the only other thing is, I don't know if you wanted to say more about like the Russian position on this situation.
I think for me, the horse I beat here is just like anybody who thinks that Russia and China are an alternative here. These folks were OG cracking down, you know. So if you think it's wrong what France is doing to Pavel Durov, which is wrong, it is wrong what they're doing.
Yeah.
Then the reason Pavel Durov even exists is because Russia tried it first. So in your multipolar world, we're talking about a multipolar dictatorship. Like choose which pole of dictatorship you want to live underneath. So good luck with that. And I'm opposed. Like what's happening to Pavel Durov, I oppose. Obviously what's happening to Richard Medhurst and Scott Ritter, I oppose. But it can't be reformed. It's like I said, people just have to understand. And there is no freedom to be found on the globe as long as the capitalist system is continued to allow to be the system under which economic and political decisions are made.
Yeah, and I think that so I've heard Scott Ritter and Garland Nixon talk about this situation, where if they are able to take down someone like Scott Ritter, like people like us are next. Like uh, I forgot that home, or it's about the coming after the Jews, and
Oh, that was like during the Nazi thing when they
Mhm.
came after and I didn't say anything. They came after so and so and I didn't say anything. And they came after so and so and they didn't say anything. Then they came after me and no one said anything, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and again, it goes the same with what I guess is more complicated, like Trump, right? Because they've used the state to create this narrative, right? And some people celebrate that, and maybe we're not speaking to those people in our piece of the net, but I do try to convey that to whoever I can, that that is not no cause for celebration, because they're able to censor Trump, they're able to censor people that you don't like. You know, you're next, because I think implicit in the arguments that the state is making, right, to go after Pavel Durov, is this notion that they are the sorters of truth,
Yep.
right? And that they are the authority to say what is not good, what is good, what is criminal, right? And they can criminalize anything, really. I've heard some stories about like Europe, that they're actually cracking down a little more, on like regular people,
Yep.
for like posts that they're making, so there are implications, um, right? And I think uh, we haven't gotten to this point just by the state becoming more bold. We've gotten to this point by also facilitating this whole cancel culture, that people are participating in the internet, like persecuting certain people who said something that they didn't like, or they didn't,
Yep.
and you know, by enabling some sort of like public lynching of sorts, on the digital sphere. Um, so I, as much as the state, like has its hands, I think that we all have a role, right, that we play in what's happening.
Hmm. Yeah. And, I've been talking with Brian and Brian, has been talking about his concerns about the rise of the far right and the Nazi and the white nationalists and, um, okay. Um, but let me be clear. If you ask me to be which which am I more concerned about? The rise of the far right or the state empowering itself to crack down on the far right? I am way more afraid of the state. Way more. That is far more dangerous than, in my opinion, than whatever people are seeing with the rise of a far right in Europe and the United States and other places. Um, Maybe you could say there's a connection between those two, but in my opinion, we need to keep our eye on the actual authority that has the most weapons, the most power centralized within it, and will use it and is using it to destroy the globe and make lives miserable for humanity. Um, and that is, the consolidation of power within the state, the capitalist state. So um, that's something that comes to my mind, which is the the question of whether workers can organize themselves into a collective force that can make a revolution happen. That's still a question on the table, and the question of far right ideologies or other type of ideologies being put on offer in the context of a desperate working class. That's still an issue, but I think our biggest problem, the biggest thing we face, our biggest um, barrier is still the growing strength and consolidation of power within the capitalist state.
I mean, and I don't know, and on this topic, on the white nationalists, the militias, I know Alex has brought it up too. um Again, I I feel like that's more of a distraction, because I am more afraid of, people like Kamala, right? In
Yeah.
that, who is a chameleon and will actually, get away
Yep.
as a Trojan horse in a lot of people's minds, right? And I guess some people, the more liberals, I might say that that's some element of white supremacy, but that, again, that's not understanding, in my view, how the system works and why they're elevating. Because, I mean, who was it? I was listening. Also, Condoleezza Rice. This is like 20 something years ago, right? Like, uh, what was the other dude who was black? Powell. My point is that
Oh,
yeah, there's now they come in all flavors. The people that are gonna crack it down on our
yeah.
heads. So I'm not just worried about some fucking white nationalists,
Yeah.
because I do keep in my mind a quote from Kwame Ture that basically says that, like, if a white supremacist wants to kill me, lynch me, that's his problem. And whether if he has the power to lynch me, that's my fucking problem. And I think in this day and age, and my point is that I understand that the state will use whatever divisions there are, or the powers that be will use whatever divisions there are. They will pin people against each other, and in that fight, they're no different than than who I'm fighting. They're part of the same bundle.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna just worry about this one section, right? Like, uh, because I do think it gets a little overplayed in my view. It's
Mhm.
much bigger than that.
Yeah. I agree. If Brian listens to this episode, he's going to disagree, but that's where I stand on it. I think that's it. All right, Kenny, good job today.
We got through it.
Yeah. All right. So thanks everyone for joining us for this discussion. Let me go to our thing. And look forward to having Alex and Eduardo back next week, hopefully. Until then, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes, wherever you found this episode, or on our blog, what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes of this podcast channel there and connect with us. I remind people, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 8 platforms: Spotify, iTunes, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, or Telegram. And if you'd like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us, please contact us through our blog. So that's it for this week. For Andy and for Kenny, thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.